Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome to the podcast. This week I'm back in Kyiv. I've been attending the Yalta European Strategy, conference in Kyiv. There's been a bit of an embargo on the reporting of this, so we had to wait till everyone essentially left Ukraine in order to be able to report on that. So you will see some articles from me coming out on my Substack at www.latikarenberg.com. But it is my great pleasure to this week introduce you to my next guest, who is someone I have literally been probably stalking, no joke, at just about every security conference I attend these days. It is Kurt Volker, who is an American diplomat. He served as US ambassador to NATO, the Bush administration, that's George W. And then he volunteered under Trump 1.0 as special representative in Ukraine. He resigned that position in 2019. So he is somebody who obviously brings a huge deal of experience, but also contextual analysis. He remains obviously deeply committed to Ukraine and US leadership and global security generally. And I was so pleased when he said to me, yes, he would finally come on my podcast. I've literally been asking him for about a year and a half. I began by asking Kurt Volker to explain his continuing interest in Ukraine and how important it is that Ukraine wins.
Right, well, that's a very philosophical question. It's important because freedom matters. It's the great struggle of humanity. Are people citizens and they get to live freely and choose and change their governments? Or do you have small groups of people who seize power and try to rule over others? And you and I are fortunate enough to live in societies that are free. And Ukraine is in the midst of the struggle for freedom, so it matters.
Why does that not seem to be clear in the halls of Washington, D.C., where these decisions are made and could be transformative to the outcome of this war?
Yeah, I think it is clear to the majority of the public, to people in the Congress. We just had a vote in the House of Representatives, for example. A few members proposed cutting off all military aid to Ukraine, and they, out of 425 votes, I guess they got 60. I mean, 370 some voted against that idea. So very strong support for Ukraine that way. There is in the U.S. a political movement, MAGA, America First, however you want to say it, that as part of its brand is skeptical of everything. And they question conventional wisdom. And they want to know what's in it for the United States. So it's a very narrow America First look at the world. And even through that lens, a number of people come around to the view that I just expressed. Well, it's actually in America's interests for the frontiers of freedom to be expanding in the world. But not all come to that conclusion, and some of them say, look, why are we spending American taxpayer money on this? This is not our war. We didn't start this war. We don't want to be in this war. We should be focusing on what we can do at home. We should be spending our money on our country, not on other people's countries. So you get a lot of that as well. And you have at the very top of the system President Trump, who is a fundamentally different type of politician than we've ever had in leadership before. He is very transactional. He's very business-minded. He wants to know what the deal is. I think he genuinely wants peace in Ukraine. But I think the reason he wants peace is so that you can get on with doing business.
Yes.
And he would just like to see it end, and he's not as invested in the values that the Ukrainians are fighting for and what any particular outcome in Ukraine means. He just wants the outcome to be one where it's over.
Okay, so even if we accept that logic, and by the way, how do you explain that movement growing and overtaking the Republican Party? It's not just a segment of thinking like the Tea Party was. This is now the mainstream.
Yeah, that is mainly, I think, a function of the excesses of the left. That they, through so many different things, open borders on immigration, sanctuary cities, tent cities with drugs and homeless people taking over the downtowns of major cities on the West Coast, fentanyl and the opioid epidemic that we had in the U.S. that went on uncontrolled, the whole left social agenda, wokeism, and so forth. All of this created a backlash, and Trump capitalized on that backlash and got reelected to power.
That doesn't explain how we hear so many Russian narratives coming out of Republican mouths.
No, that's something different, because the Russian narratives are, first off, they're false, but they are packaged in a way to go along with this America First movement. That it's the excesses of the previous administration or previous administrations were too much U.S. involvement in the world, too many wars, spending too much money abroad. We created the NATO enlargement, and that provoked Russia. That sort of thing plays into that America First movement, because you get to blame everybody that went before. So they like that. And they don't know any better, which is another problem. We have I hate to say this, but we have an ignorance problem where not enough people really know the history, and they really understand the structures and principles on which a prosperous world has been based for so long. They just don't know. And so it's easy to take shots at it.
There was a message, going back to your blaming point, it's a good way to put it. There was a message broadcast from President Trump this morning, and I watched it and I actually felt really mortified by it, because he's sitting there going, Biden, 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 this would never have happened. Actually, under President Trump, Putin has escalated his war.
That's right.
With an incursion even into NATO airspace on the weekend.
That's right. He keeps the narrative going. He says this all the time. Terrible war, needs to stop, would never have happened if I was president, and constant blaming someone else and saying he's doing everything he can to stop it. But as you say, Putin has escalated the war in terms of attacks on the front line, in terms of attacks on Ukrainian cities, drones, missiles, abduction of children, war crimes, and now, just recently, a deliberate probing of NATO airspace with at least 19 drones to see how NATO reacts, and to set a new baseline that, you better be careful, NATO, because if you don't end this war soon, i.e. putting the blame on NATO for the war, if you don't end this war soon, it might come to you.
So you used to be an ambassador to NATO for the United States. Can you tell me a little bit about what would have taken shape inside of NATO when they realized those drones are coming into Polish airspace?
You don't want to know?
Oh, I do.
So you'll have, now we have over 30 countries in NATO, so you have a lot of different points of view. The first thing that will happen is you'll seek a military briefing and military advice, like what do we actually know, what happened. Professionals in the military or intelligence services always include the degree to which there is uncertainty. Like, here's what we think, but we have this degree of confidence, and they also provide alternatives. Well, then some people seize on that to say, well, we don't know for sure.
Which is what's happening now, interestingly, with this Polish incursion.
That's right. We don't know for sure that the Russians did this intentionally. We don't know whether there was a target in Poland or not. Therefore, we can't really say that this was a Russian intent to attack NATO. It could have been any number of other explanations, which are theoretically possible. And the obvious and the common sense and what you know from Putin, from psychology, from his policies, as to what he does and why, that gets watered down. So that's one thing. The second thing is then people say, well, what are our options? What should we do? And then half the people in the room will immediately say, but we mustn't escalate. We don't want to militarize the situation. We don't want to be provocative. So, of course, yes, we need to defend our territories and we need to be prepared, but we don't want to escalate. So that leads to heightened readiness.
I'm getting PTSD because literally this is all the narratives I've been hearing for the last few years, and it is so frustrating because if we just showed strength at some point and gave a good whack back.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I believe we should do, and
Yes.
it's very straightforward. Putin has shown a willingness to put the lives of NATO country citizens at risk. That should be unacceptable to NATO country governments. We don't want our citizens' lives to be put at risk. So having defense of our own airspace is clearly not enough because he got into our airspace. So we need to declare an extended air defense zone, which we do over open water, but we should be doing it in Europe now. We would need an extended air defense zone of 150 to 200 kilometers where we will not accept dangerous flying objects in that area.
And this is primarily where? On the Polish side?
Take a circle on a map and just
Yep.
draw it around the Polish borders and airspace and around Romanian and Slovakia, Hungary, and say anything that is within 150 to 200 kilometers of that is an unknown and unfriendly object, we will take it out. And of course, that will require us to work closely with Ukraine and to integrate our intelligence, mapping, and interception of these things. But we should be doing this for the safety of NATO country populations because Vladimir Putin has now shown he's willing to put them at risk.
So why aren't we doing this?
Because many people would say, oh, that's provocative. We might end up shooting down a Russian plane. What if there's a pilot? And no one asks themselves, but do they have a right to be flying in Ukrainian airspace 100 miles from our territory? No, they don't. But people worry about all those things and escalation and getting into some kind of conflict, making NATO a party to the conflict. They worry about that. What I think is always underestimated is the cost of inaction. Everyone weighs the cost of action. If we do this, there might be a consequence, so we should be careful. And they don't think if we don't do it, there might be a consequence, and that could be worse. And this is both the risk that our own populations face, the risk of Putin emboldened in his attacks against Ukraine, and the risk that an individual NATO ally may respond in the moment because they're being attacked without the kind of coordinated response from NATO that we would have wanted.
Are we eroding Article 5?
I wouldn't go that far. Because there hasn't been an attack on a NATO country. There's been an incursion, and we shot down those drones.
With fighter jets. I mean, that is not sustainable, that response.
No, it's really not. And it shows a willingness to down things. It shows a willingness to fight back if there is such an incursion. But there wasn't an attack or an attempt to take over NATO territory. There was an attack on a military installation or a population or anything. So I don't think it has really crossed that threshold. And the response shows that if it were that, we would have responded. Mm-hmm. But we have definitely eroded, if not completely lost, deterrence. Because deterrence is based on the notion that you have the capability and the will to act. And I think Putin is constantly testing our will, and we keep coming up short.
Was the United States a reliable partner?
Was. When?
After the Polish incursion. We have seen President Trump come out and say maybe it was a mistake.
Yeah, I think he's not alone. He may be the leading spokesperson, but there are several in the alliance who have said, let's be careful, maybe it was a mistake, we don't know.
He's not alone, and it's right, obviously, to question what we don't know and say that, but it fits with a pattern.
It does.
And that's the problem, isn't it?
It does. Well, what President Trump has done, I think you have to look at it both half empty and half full. He has complained about NATO, he's complained about people being freeloaders, not spending enough on defense, called into question whether the U.S. would really come to a country's defense if they hadn't spent enough on their own defense. So a lot of glass half empty things there. But the result of that has been a strengthening of NATO, because now we have a 5% target for defense spending. Everybody is now at 2%. Poland is close to 5% already. He went to the Hague meeting and praised NATO and said, look, this is much better.
I was there. It was a very successful meeting, I thought.
He even said something for his MAGA base about NATO, which was, it's not a ripoff. Very significant, because he had previously said it's a ripoff. So he corrected that. So I think he did all of this with a view to strengthening NATO And strengthening NATO means getting Europe to do more, because Europe had been coasting. And so I think he deliberately set out to get Europe to take its share. When it comes to air defense, when it comes to Ukraine, he has the same view. He wants Europe to do this. Everyone always looks to the US and says, what are you going to do? And he immediately turns that right around and says, no, what are you going to do?
It's a bit like a parent teaching a toddler to walk, isn't it?
Although usually it's not the toddler teaching the parent. But
there is a lot valid in what Trump has done and said with NATO. I think everybody can see and agree with that. But I'm still not sure at the end of the day if you call SOS that the United States is there anymore. Do you think they are?
I think so.
Do you think Europe thinks?
Well, that's different. I think Europe is feeling completely ill at ease with Trump and the Trump administration. They just don't know. They don't have confidence. He's unpredictable. He's transactional. He doesn't talk about values the way they're used to. So they're not sure. I personally am pretty confident for a variety of reasons. First off, Trump has said this himself now during this second term, that, of course, if someone's attacked, these people love their countries, they're going to spend more to defend them, and they, of course, will come to their help. And also the American public and the American Congress would demand that if an ally is attacked, we have to help them. So I'm not doubting our commitment, but you're right to ask, well, maybe Europeans are, though.
Do you think NATO is still fit for purpose? Because what's interesting about the Coalition of the Willing is that it's a reduced American presence. There's not going to be necessarily boots on the ground. Whatever the security backstop is, we're yet to find out. But what you actually are seeing is, like, my country, Australia, contribute, saying it's willing to put its hand up. Japan probably won't send troops, obviously, for its own reasons, but it's going to contribute to this Coalition of the Willing. Canada, the same. Actually, we're seeing a newer sort of alliance form, and with military heft behind it. So I actually wonder, in this environment where we've got North Korea, China, Iran, and Russia collaborating, is NATO a restriction on what we can do in the West as a combined team?
Only if people take it as a restriction. It doesn't restrict in any way. There's nothing that prevents European countries from spending 10% of GDP on defense. There's nothing that prevents them from sending troops to Ukraine today. There's no restriction.
Interestingly, Boris Johnson has been saying this, send them now and short circuit this demand for a ceasefire or the wait. What do you think about that?
I think he's totally right. I think it was very short-sighted of the Biden administration to withdraw American presence from Ukraine when Russia attacked. We should have...
What did you have in Ukraine?
We had trainers, people working with the Ukrainian military. Usually they're special forces trainers, but they're people who are working with them on everything from equipment to structure to the way units behave, helping them to become as westernized and interoperable with NATO as possible.
And was this put in from 2014 to the time of the full-scale invasion?
Yeah, 2014, yes, even before 2014, although under Obama it was restricted to non-lethal assistance, so peacekeeping, medical, the soft side of military.
And this explains why the Ukrainians always say Trump was the guy who sent us javelins.
Which is true.
Yeah.
So when Trump came into office, and this is when I was special representative, we got rid of the ban on lethal assistance, and we did much more full spectrum training with the Ukrainian military, and we provided lethal defensive arms. And even though all our European allies had been worried about doing that and saying, oh, don't do that, they immediately followed and did it too. So it really helped the Ukrainians a lot.
How much is Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan responsible for the mess that we find ourselves in Europe?
I hate to say it because I know both of them and they're very good people, but they got this wrong. We should have responded forcefully, swiftly, with everything possible, as quickly as possible. Russia has had 3.5 years now to regroup, reorient, wage a different kind of war. They could have been pushed back and stopped in the first year, and we could have had a ceasefire then. And we didn't do that. If you remember, we had no to Stingers. We had no to tanks. We had no to aircraft. We had no to HIMARS.
And every red line that we set for ourselves, we crossed subsequently.
Yeah, for the most part. There are still a few that they carried right up to the end, like the use of the ATACMS at their longest range. Yes. They still said, don't do that. They still said, don't attack inside Russia with our equipment. It's crazy. It's crazy to say that. Russia is attacking inside Ukraine every single day, and they're attacking civilians. So to tell Ukraine, don't hit military installations in Russia that are attacking you, it is mind-boggling.
So now we have a very different war. Yeah. And the other thing I would add to what you didn't bring up there is that the inaction allowed Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia to get together in a way they didn't during the first few years. So what does this mean as someone who has cared deeply about European security, seeing this security picture now move over into, it has morphed, I think, into a broader domain. It's now a more existential battle that we fight. Granted, we have a US administration that doesn't see things in terms of moral values in this way. But what does that mean for all of us now together?
Well, that's another great question, and it's also in the philosophical category.
It is. I know we're running out of time, so you will have limited time to answer.
Bookend to your first question. So on the one hand, this is the axis of authoritarians and imperialists who feel that they have a right to rule and a right to rule over others. And we in the West, as a political concept rather than a geographic concept, we should recognize this and we should stand together against that and try to continue to protect and promote freedom and democracy and rule of law and human rights and so forth. But what's interesting about that is because the very nature of that axis of authoritarians is what it is. It is small groups of people grabbing and exercising power. They don't actually share common interests with each other. They are greedy about themselves. And when you look at that grouping, they don't have each other's back. They don't care. It's an opportunism to show that they're together to oppose a Western-led world order.
But Kurt, what they do have is mass and scale. So they can send troops through the Russian meat grinder. They can keep funding and helping Russia make swarms of drones that overwhelm the Ukrainians.
Much more complicated than that, in my view. Like the North Koreans sending 30,000 troops to Russia. First off, the North Koreans aren't thrilled with that. Mm-hmm. Second, they don't want them fighting in Ukraine. They'd rather have them in Russia, although some have gone to Ukraine. And third, Russia burns through 30,000 soldiers in the space of a month anyway. So this is like good soldiers after bad. The reason North Korea is in this is because they want missile technology from Russia. And I think that's actually more significant than the aid that they're giving to Russia. Yeah. Russia's struggling in this war, and 30-year-old artillery shells and 10,000 soldiers is not going to make a big difference in how this goes for Russia. China is in it for China. It's like, if you want to buy our stuff, buy it. You want to sell us cheap energy, we'll buy that. But we're not waging this war for you. We don't care if you win or lose. You're on your own here. They don't say that, but that's actually their policy. And here Israel attacks Iran, the U.S. follows up, taking out nuclear facilities. And how much help does Russia give them?
Crickets.
Yeah, zero. Zero. So this is not the alliance they want it to appear, and we shouldn't be intimidated by it, but we should be guided by our own principles and our own interests.
Mm-hmm. And just finally, if there's a wish list, how do we stop this war, and why doesn't the Trump administration correct the mistakes of the Biden administration and simply give Ukraine the tactical weapons capability it needs to shut this down?
Yes, that is a very good question, because framing it that way, I think, is the right way to frame it for President Trump. The Biden administration did not get this right. As Trump would have said, they let the war happen to begin with, and then they didn't act in an effective way to stop it. And the only way to stop it is to convince Putin that it's too costly for him and for Russia to keep going. And that then requires a military component and an economic component. And on the military side, we should be making sure Ukraine has everything it needs to hit Russian military forces, not civilians, not cities, but go after lines of communication, bridges, roads, fuel depots, ammunition depots, airfields, aircraft, you name it, the things that Russia wages war with. Let Ukraine have everything they need to take that up. On the economic side, Russia has one principal source of revenue, which is oil and gas sales abroad. And despite the sanctions we have in place, there are plenty of people around the world willing to engage in that trade with Russia, so Russia keeps getting money. We should be using secondary sanctions, not tariffs, secondary sanctions to go after those people that are engaged in that trade by making it impossible, or certainly very difficult and expensive, to use the international financial system to do deals with Russia. That should help to dry up the flow of money to the Kremlin. Those two things should be done, and I think would have a dramatic impact on Putin's calculations.
So why aren't they?
Because I believe that President Trump wants a deal at the end of all this. Pushing Russia that hard is creating a confrontation with Russia, and what he really wants is a deal with Russia, because he thinks that as soon as there's a deal, we can make lots of money. We can have resource deals with Russia, billions and billions of dollars. Wouldn't that be great? And so he doesn't want to throw away that prospect. And I just believe that is a wish that Putin is using. He is using Trump. He's exploiting Trump's desire to have that deal by dangling it while pursuing his real aims, which is the destruction of Ukraine.
And how is it for you being an American? You and I see each other at a lot of these forums. I know everyone likes you personally, but is it difficult now for you?
Well, I don't feel that I have to defend the Trump administration or the Biden administration. I can say what I think.
But you're a servant of your country.
I was in an official way for 25 years. I certainly believe in my country, and I don't think that anything, and I certainly don't think this is ever the end. And the principles and the people of our country, the founding documents and the institutions we have, these are great things, and they do work. And I still have a lot of faith in the country, and there will be another thing after this.
Well, I hope to share your optimism. Kurt Volker, I've been wanting to interview you for so long.
You're very persistent.
So I'm so grateful that you finally agreed. Many, many thanks.
My pleasure, Latika. Thank you.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.